Five or Flop, a podcast for the best and worst historical fiction has to offer. I'm your host, Erin.
And I'm Grace, and each week we'll be reading a different historical fiction book to see if they're a five or a flop.
The theme for season 5 is family and friends, and today we're here with my friend and former roommate, Spencer. Spencer, how are you? And would you like to share what we're reading this week?
Sure. Hey, I'm Spencer. What's going on? We are reading The Paper Daughters of Chinatown by Heather B. Moore.
And why did you pick this book for us?
I don't have a lot of historical fiction on my shelf, and I really wanted to do this podcast because it sounded cool, and you guys are great. And I was sort of scrounging, and someone in my family gave me this book a while back to read. Had not read it for about 2 or 3 years. It was gaining some dust. But it was a topic I was really interested in. Just a lot of there's I don't know. It's such an interesting period in American history, the Chinese migration to the United States, and this covers one, small sliver of that I hadn't really read about before and was curious about. So I knew nothing about the book except the general premise, and I was like, "This sounds interesting. I'll suggest it. Let's see if Aaron and Grace are interested as well," and sort of went from there. So yeah,
and we went for it.
This was also a great pick because it was not necessarily time period, but historical moment that we haven't really covered before.
Yeah, it's a very specific time. It's California in this sort of narrow window in American history, and it's, I don't know. The interesting thing is it's just sort of I don't know. I feel like we've sort of flattened a lot of our perception of the United States, and this is just it's really interesting to me just to read about California at this very specific time. It's sort of post Gold Rush ish. There's a lot of, this is after the Civil War. We're still sort of dealing with questions around race and immigration and what it means to be an American. And I don't know, I find this is an interesting combination of things where a lot of that comes to clash. So yeah.
Completely agree. I'm excited to talk through all of it. But before we jump in, how has everyone's weeks been going?
Today, we're all reporting out from DC Snowmageddon, as they're calling it. So we're all bundled up in our cozy houses. Hopefully, we got time to do some fun things before the weather turned bad.
Yeah, so I am actually stuck home alone. Santiago has been in Colombia, and he was supposed to be flying back today. They moved his flight to Thursday. Everything else is completely sold out. So usually I enjoy, having some time to myself, but I've been very lonely, and I'm I would like you to just come home so I'm not sitting here snowed in. But luckily, Hannah and Jen of hosting previous week podcasts for us, they live literally across the street. So Flynn and I are going over tonight to watch a movie. So at least get a little socialization in.
Flynn got invited to watch the movie? That's big.
Flynn did get invited. Flynn has been invited over there before, but I think especially with the snow, I would not want to leave her at home anyways, just in case anything should happen. So,
well, I was going to say, I thought it was because there's snow, so you're not going to be outside. So Flynn doesn't have the opportunity to jump the fence and go rogue.
That is true, but I don't think Flynn is going to be in their backyard. However, she would immediately dig under their fence. No, the snow is actually too high for her to walk comfortably in, so she might have to be carried over there.
Aw, poor thing.
Grace and Spencer, what's up with y'all?
Guess first.
Not much for me. Just snowed in as well. Sort of enjoying the winter weather. It's been funny to watch everyone in DC panic and pilfer the Trader Joe's for every last piece of goods. I was just walking around outside yesterday thinking, this is a normal day in Toronto this time of year. And yeah, not that much different. But the thing that does change here is that nothing works. This is not a city that's used to snow. It happens 1 to 3 times a year. So we are not prepared at all. So for that, I kind of understand some of the panic. But yeah.
Sorry, you and I are coming from two completely different experiences because I'm from Orlando and this is the most snow I have ever seen in my life before. The fact that it was up to past my ankles today, insane. Can't function in it. But I think you're right. I just don't think DC or any city really here or below is built for any of this.
And I'm the third perspective, which is that I am from here. So I'm just this is how you handle snow. I'm this is a normal amount of snow and a normal amount of response. And that's that.
Grace, you did get to get out of the house last night for restaurant week. How was that?
I did. It was delightful. I had two restaurant week trips this week, which was lovely. So one on Thursday, one yesterday. Yesterday, we went to Bresca, which is right next to the Trader Joe's that was sold out of all their bread. And if anyone has a special occasion, I highly recommend it. It was delightful. I would not recommend going like completely whole hog there because they do have a $400 wine pairing, but I would not recommend that.
Wow. I don't think I like wine that much, but
Not $400 much.
and while we're all stuck at home in the cold, I'm sure we'll be reading some stuff. So would anyone like to share what is on their reading list right now?
I am reading a few things. Coming out of the break, I thought I was going to get way more reading done because I got a ton of stuff read over Christmas, which was great. And now I'm just seeing books pile up on my nightstand, which makes me a little anxious. But I'm reading Harperland, which is a book about Canadian politics of a pretty bland prime minister from, I think, 2004 to 2015. So lots of thrilling stuff there. Perhaps equally or even more thrilling book by Ben Bernanke about monetary policy. I've been sort of getting slowly through that. Just finished a little short story from this short story collection by Stefan Zweig. It was this Austrian author that I'm very fond of. Some of his stories were used for like the Grand Budapest Hotel and sort of woven into that whole thing. But yeah, that's sort of what I'm going through.
I love Grand Budapest Hotel.
Yeah,
It's such a cute movie. Yeah.
That was on our movie poster of 100 Best Movies. So I had seen that one. Grace, you're also reading something that's not nonfiction, but also of much literary merit.
Yes, I just finished it yesterday. My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. I grabbed it out of a little free library just because I had heard about it. I knew people really love those series of books. People think Elena Ferrante is an intriguing mystery. And my take is it was super fucking boring.
I did not like that book at all.
Yeah, I'm not going to read the others. I read the plot summaries of the other three on Wikipedia, and I thought these seem boring too.
Spencer, have you read that one?
I have not, but I did gift that book to my brother's wife. So
maybe she will
hopefully
like
she
it
likes it.
because it has very good ratings. Everyone loves them. I didn't think enough happened.
Last year, I remember that I think it was like the best books of like the 20th or the 21st century so far. I think it was like number one on that list. So then I did the audiobook and I'm like, wow, I don't enjoy this at all. Nothing's happening. But that one is of literary note. What I am reading is not of any literary merit, and that is an audiobook, The Uglies, which Grace, I know you're familiar with. Spencer, I might be surprised if you're familiar with, but it is like a young adult book about like everyone having plastic surgery to conform to society and become a pretty. And I'm not super far into it, but I am very intrigued by the premise and liking it so far. So far on my scale of the YA audiobooks on my journey, it is definitely above the Match series, not even on the same planet as the Hunger Games.
These came first, I think. So at least you can say like Uglies walked so Hunger Games could run.
Yes, no, Uglies was first, but I enjoy it. I think I need to get into more because I still have so much questions about the world building, but I don't even know if I'm at the halfway point, so I can't make a judgment call.
Well, and then when you finish the series, we can watch the Netflix movie where Laverne Cox is evil.
There's a Netflix movie? Now I have motivation to finish. Okay.
And everyone hated it, but I thought it was great.
Well, those are my favorite kind of movies, so.
So you have a reward waiting for you at the end.
Exactly. All right. Is it time to get into the synopsis?
I think it is.
All right. Well, I will take us there and then go into the author bio because I did find some interesting items to discuss. Synopsis. In the late 19th century, San Francisco was a booming city with a dark side, one in which a powerful underground organization, the Criminal Tong, buys and sells young Chinese women into prostitution and slavery. These paper daughters, so called because fake documents gain them entry to America but leave them without legal identity, generally have no recourse. But the Occidental Mission Home for Girls is one bright spot of hope and help. Told in alternating chapters, this rich narrative follows the stories of young Donaldina, I believe is the pronunciation. I did not look up any pronunciations. Cameron, who works in the mission home, and Maylene, a paper daughter who thinks she is coming to America for an arranged marriage, but instead is sold into a life of shame and disrepair. Donaldina, a real-life pioneering advocate for social justice, bravely stands up to corrupt officials and violent gangs, helping to win freedom for thousands of Chinese women. Maylene endures heartbreak and betrayal in her search for hope, belonging, and love. Their stories merge in this gripping account of the courage and determination that helped shape a new course of women's history in America. I thought that was a good synopsis.
Yes, delightful. And I feel like Heather Moore, when she wrote this book, she has the awareness that most people are not going to be familiar with this topic before.
Yeah,
and I do think she does a good job of presenting it as to a new audience.
Very good level of intro. Spencer, for your awareness, sometimes we have like the most abysmal synopsises on this pod. So we are always grateful to acknowledge when we have a good one.
Nice. Okay. Cool.
All right, let's talk about Heather B. Moore. So according to her website, taken word for word, Heather B. Moore writes primarily history and hashtag her story. Our favorite kind of author. She is in the famous line of Mormon BYU authors, including Stephanie Meyers of the Twilight series. And she is often known for her Latter-day Saints books. She has like a wide array of books, and a lot of them are related to the LDS Church and specific like biblical figures. So she sometimes writes under Heather B. Moore or H.B. Moore or Jane Red, depending on her genre. So I guess she's kind of like got her hands in several different pots. So good for her. I do not believe in authors having to confine themselves to one genre. So I do like to see that. And something I found that was interesting, kind of following up on A Gentleman in Moscow, where the author had an interesting habit of writing the book before doing any research. Heather B. Moore says she spends about 10 to 20% of her time researching versus writing, which I thought was a very low amount. But she did say that she used to spend a lot more time researching than writing when she was first getting started, which I think makes a lot of sense. You know, once you get more confident and familiar with different subject matter, it just naturally, you need a little less.
Yeah, I guess she's gotten the swing of things.
But I found that interesting. Has anyone read anything else by her? She does have like a lot of books.
I don't think so. And I don't think I had heard of this book either before you suggested it, Spencer.
Again, like I chose this a little blindly. I was just like, what is on my shelf? And that's sort of where I got it. So I was not aware of any of that context before picking this book. I was just like, this is an interesting subject. I would assume this is good. And yeah, just sort of went from there.
And even just like a quick glance at her website, which I have up right now, her historical fiction is like a bunch of different genres. It looks like she has one or two World War II ones, just judging by the cover. A lot of biblical ones about Mary and Martha, Ruth, Eve, like specifically women's biblical history. So truly, hashtag her story. I don't know if I'm going to read anything else by her, just as a spoiler, but she has a lot to choose from. So, all right, let's jump straight into our disclaimer because it is very relevant this week. Our judgments come based on the book and characters within the book rather than any real historical figures they may have been based on, which in this case, it seems to be most of the characters, and also spoilers ahead. So let's dive in. And where would anyone like to start?
Well, I think a good place to start coming off the disclaimer is to say that we have a split perspective in this book. So we have two different perspectives. One is of Donaldina Cameron, who is the real life figure, who is the executive director of the Occidental Mission. But then we have Mei Lian, who is a paper daughter, and she is a fictional character. There are other Chinese paper daughters in this book who are based on real figures, and we'll get into them later. But I thought it was interesting to have that dichotomy of a real figure versus someone that Heather Moore came up with.
Yeah, and I have my copy of the book here, which is so rare for me, so I'm proud of myself, but it's just because it's too cold to go up to the library right now. It does have a breakdown, like in the author's note, of both the historical timeline and the character chart by which are historical and which are fictional. And it is the vast majority are based on real people, kind of in the same vein of She Who Became the Sun.
Yes. And I have a note about that. So I think this was actually handled well. I have a lot of things that we'll get into that I have complaints about for this book from a craft perspective, but I don't think that all of the real characters overwhelmed the narrative. I think even sometimes when they were real, they were used sparingly. Like, I don't think Heather Moore was doing that thing where sometimes authors get a little too zealous about the research that they've done and they want us to know everything that they have looked up. That was our biggest complaint about Frozen River, was all of these completely superfluous characters that the author included because they were real. And in this case, I don't think that she did that. And in fact, I do think the book was stronger when it focused on the real characters, because I think that in my view, the sections with Donaldina were demonstrably better than the sections with Mei-Lian.
I agree with that. It felt like the real characters gave her a basis for characterization, which I think worked to her strength here.
I almost disagree. And I felt like I liked Mei Lian sections more because it just felt like there was some plot to them. And I didn't really know where the story was headed with. At least like there was a bit more of a goal, or there's like a clear, like, this is where this is going to be resolved. And I found those pages just turned a lot faster for me than the sections with Dina. And I felt like and maybe we can get into this later too, but I felt like one of the irritating things about this book is that it spends a lot of time just telling you very morally bland things. There's like conversations with Officer Cook sometimes where it's like, and they're bartering over the price of a human being. And it's like, yeah, like this is very clearly bad. We don't need this really spelled out for us. So I felt like that was something that was threaded a bit too much into Donaldina's side of this, whereas the parts with Malia, there's actually some interesting, like, there's been quite the same like analysis thrown at you that's very plain, and I kind of liked that part of the writing with that side of the story. But at the same time, though, like there's some really interesting parts to Dolly's story in this that I just wish were just handled a bit more interestingly. Yeah.
Overall, I think my issue with Mei-Lian's section, because I do agree with you, it does have more of a plot. You see where it's more of it's going. I wrote that I found Mei-Lian overall passive, not necessarily in terms of her character. I think of it more as just like her sections are kind of just like what is happening to and around her. And I understand she's a character with a lack of agency throughout the vast majority of these sections. But at the same time, it felt like very predictable where her story was going to me versus Donaldina's. I at least like it was kind of more of a day by day. So yeah, it was a bit more plotless, but for me it worked a little better because I was just more interested to see like what is the next situation she's going to encounter. But I completely agree with you about like the moralizing of it when it was stuff that is just like you can't argue that it's bad. Like it's not something that needs to be moralized. And I do feel like that's where a lot of the heavy Christian theming came in, and completely understand again, it's a mission home, you know, it was under Christian principles. It still is. I'll get into that in historical accuracy section. But I could also feel like a lot of the author's values coming through very, very heavily there as well.
Yeah,
I agree.
I think that's totally fair. I think, yeah.
Spencer, I completely agree with you about all of your points. Like, I don't think you're wrong, but I think it just shows it's interesting how two people can read the same book and have different priorities. Because I think, Aaron, you're right that I don't feel like Mei-Lian got characterized at all. Like, I couldn't tell you anything about who she is as a person, aside from all the things that happened to her. And when Heather Moore got the opportunity to make up the plot, I think when she didn't have the guardrails of like real life history to kind of hem her in, she went a little off the rails. When Mei-Lian is forced into prostitution, her very first customer is like a nice, kind man who falls in love with her and like saves her from being a prostitute. And I could not get over how ridiculous that is. It's just like, I don't know. Immediately I was like, okay, so this is it then. I don't think it did a good job of representing what happened to the real Paper Daughters.
I think that's really interesting because I did read somewhere, this was a book also based off of Dolly Cameron's life. It's a book called The White Devil's Daughters. And the White Devil is the nickname for Dolly Cameron, given to her by the Tong and other affiliated groups and people. But it's more of a like historical retelling of her story as opposed to like a fictionalization of it, or not fictionalization, novelization of it. And one of the things that was brought up in that is that a lot of sometimes these women would go to the house to be rescued so they could end up with the person that they were sort of, what's the light word for it, but you know, that was contracted with for prostitution. Like the man would want to purchase this woman and then would balk at the price basically, and then they would sort of scheme to go to the house and then be broken free of that and then get married afterwards. I'll be honest, I'm out of my depth here. I don't really know how common or like how representative that story is. I don't know what other, other things go into that, but I thought that was sort of a don't know, it's sort of fascinating. Like I wonder like how this actually played out, because the Chinese population in San Francisco was 90% male at the time. And because of miscegenation laws in California at the time, they weren't allowed to, you know, have any kind of relations with other women outside of the Chinese population. And then there was only like I'm sort of like I'm just wondering like how these relationships played out in reality. And your point, Grace, like that sounds ridiculous that it's just like a nice guy is the first person to line up and have the funds available. At the same time, though, like, and this is sort of a one of my other challenges with the book is I just feel like there's a lot of context that's sort of elided in this book. I wish we could just learn a bit more about, or that be a bit more baked into the complexities of the story, and like going back to sort of the bland moralization of things. I feel like I don't know, like I feel like there's ways to sort of weave this in a bit better. I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, I know that was a bit tangential, but
No,
I'm sort of like, yeah.
I agree with you, and I think you lead into an excellent point of like it does feel like there's a lot of context missing. It feels, as I wrote down, it feels infinitely too simple for such a complex subject matter. Like I feel like almost as if the author is doing too much, even by having the split sections, because I feel like there's still pieces of Dolly's life that we're focusing on that we shouldn't focus on, and I would rather attention be elsewhere. My main example of this is we get this whole plot point of a romance she has with this man Charles that just ends in like a broken off engagement, and then we never see him again. And I'm like, do we really need time spent on that when it could be given to us, going more into some of these stories, learning a bit more about the context and about who these characters are as people?
Erin, that is so interesting because I wrote down I liked the Beyonce Charles plotline.
Really?
Yeah, because I thought
I
it
kind of did
resolved.
too. Yeah.
I thought the way that it resolved was unexpected for me in a way that I liked and that held up thematically. Because essentially, she has her passion in San Francisco at the mission. He has his passion becoming like a reverend in Boston or Philly or something. And they both decide like we can't compromise on our callings in life. And so that's why they break it off. And I just think that that's a very interesting lesson. That's something interesting to happen to a woman in this time period, to give up on a marriage to keep working. So I was happy that it was included.
It's like, in theory, I agree with you and I want to agree with you, but I just didn't think it was executed well enough to be
Yeah.
worthwhile to have in the book. Because to me, I had already had the understanding that like she knew this was her calling, like that this is what she was doing. And she had already display that in like talking with her sisters, and they're like, oh, settle down and have kids, and all of this. And so that had already come across to me. So I think maybe that's just why I'm like, I would rather this portion have been used for something else.
Fair enough.
I feel like it kind of underlined sort of your point though, Aaron, that like that's I kind of like that she's sort of struggling with that and like making this big choice. And I thought it was a nice little, yeah, I don't know. I agree with everything Grace said. Like it was, I really like that it was included. Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Spencer, I see we both had the same point, and Grace, I wonder if you agree. Both Spencer and I wrote down we thought the officer cook was going to be the love interest. Did you agree with that? Doesn't seem like it based on your facial expression.
No.
Oh, all right. Well, I thought
I was surprised, to be honest. I was surprised the cops were nice.
Yeah, that too.
I'm happy that they were. I'm happy that they were like, let's go use our resources to rescue the kidnapped Chinese girls. I was proud of them. That was kind of it.
I feel like it was a small subset of the cops.
Yeah.
But I'm glad there were a couple of nice ones.
Yeah, I think this sort of goes back to our point about, we're sort of lacking a bit of context here. And I don't know, like we didn't really encounter a lot of bad cops in the story, unless I'm wrong. So it would be interesting to see sort of that internal challenge that Officer Cook may feel. Like he may feel like he just sort of what we just see in a lot of 70s crime movies where it's like, they're all on the take or something, or I don't know. I think that would have been interesting. It's just sort of like, doesn't take a lot of sentences to do that, but I think that would have been nice. Going back to the love interest thing, I was just thinking like very early on, he was one of the only men that actually had a physical description.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay, I mean, like there's your first clue, right? Like that's where this is headed.
That's what I thought. I was like, oh, she's like,
Yeah.
and he was serving the role of like providing a lot of like exposition and context at that start. And I was like, this could be a setup for, more to come. But kind of going back to what I said, because I'm thinking about it now with like, we wish we had more about like what the cops may have been feeling. And we're like, this book, I feel like has a lot of gaps in history, not in terms of Dolly's life. Like, I think we have a very clear picture of what she's going through. And a lot of the situations that happened with her in the book, for example, the stuff with the plague and the earthquake, were taken out of history. Like, that's true. But I feel like we don't really get a good explanation as to like why this is happening in the US now, and with Chinese immigrants specifically. I was pleased that I had a lot of context on this actually from a prior Lisa C book I had read, Shanghai Girls, that gave like a similar experience with the Paper Daughters and coming over to the US. But I just felt like there were a lot of historical gaps that were not added for context, and I think they should have been.
And there was some skips in the passage of time. Like, I did not think the passage of time made a lot of sense. They jumped around kind of at uneven intervals, especially towards the end. We really sped up through like several months. So we don't really get like a picture of how things are changing over that time.
Yeah, totally. I feel like it just lacked a lot of the context as to why is this group of people coming to the United States? Why do they want to come here? Like a lot of that immigration history is like it's people from the Pearl River Delta. A lot of it's like post Taiping Rebellion, either political instability or just economic migration. A lot of it's sojourner migration. A lot of the Chinese that came to the United States didn't stay. I don't know. Like I just wish that there was some more of those stories brought in, and also like there's all this like really interesting racial conflict between this immigrant group and white people in the United States, and I just I don't know, like those are really interesting conflicts to mine or even just mention, and California like was really the front line for that. Some of that happened in the East with the labor strikes between organized labor and Chinese labor was brought in to bring strikes, and that's sort of what spawned the Chinese Exclusion Act. There's no discussion of that, and like the whys of how that happened or what it was like, day to day, and like, and there's also a scene. I feel like I'm just going from tangent to tangent here, but there's a scene where Dolly is on the ferry with her daughters, and then people walk up and like, are these all your daughters? Question mark. And she's just like, yeah, no, absolutely. But you'd think there'd be a bit more, I don't know, like nuance baked into that. I think it's a really sweet and touching moment, but it's, I don't know, like a lot of it's just done very simply. And I wish there's a bit more baked into it. So.
No, I agree with everything you just said. And honestly, the pod is the perfect place for tangents. We go on them all the time, so never feel like you have to apologize. But no, I agree. I just like nuance and context missing, I think weakened it. I think the prose was weak to begin with, like the actual writing itself, I did not think was strong. Like it's definitely in terms of subject matter and what is happening, it is an adult book, but the prose felt way too young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The discussion questions at the end were something. I don't know if you guys made it to that point, but it's like
no, but my copy did have like bibliographies and citations through all of the listed for all the chapters again, which I thought was oh yeah, it does have discussion questions. I didn't even look. I can only imagine.
I never look at those. I hate to say.
Oh yeah, they look very like we would have talked about this in high school. But there was one question I found interesting, and that is that of Ah Pin Oi, if I pronounce that correctly, who was like the operator of the brothel where Maylene was. And at the end of the book, we kind of learn how she doesn't necessarily, she kind of has I hesitate to call it just like a change of heart, but also she is an exploited woman as well, who then rises to a position where she is forcing other women into prostitution. And towards the end of, I would say towards the latter half of the book, I won't say it is Maylene's ending, but towards her end, she forgives like everything that's happened. And I don't know. I'm kind of conflicted because like, I don't know. I don't even know what to, I guess because it just kind of feels too on the nose for all like the Christian theming, like the forgiveness no matter what. I'm like, does she really deserve your forgiveness? Or does it just kind of like add context as to she was also exploited and what she did was horrible, but like this might offer Maylene some personal closure.
To be honest, I thought this was one of the strongest parts of the book because it sort of leaves you a little bit confused, and there's actually some like morally gray piece in there. And to your point, Aaron, like there's the Christian theme of forgiveness and like letting go from Maylene, and like for her, it makes sense, but as like the author or as the reader, you're sort of left like, really? And that's sort of, I don't know. I feel like there's actually something there where you're actually a little bit confused and not told exactly like this is how you should feel. And then Maylene trying to make up, or not Maylene, Apinoy trying to make up for her past, if you want to call them transgressions or whatever you want to call them, the bad
Crimes.
stuff. Crimes. Yes, thank you. That was the word.
It really added to her layers as a character. And I did appreciate that. I found that whole, plot point decision to be very interesting. I'm looking in my little character list really fast. But of course, I'm not seeing Apin's. Oh, is a historical character who I didn't look into for historical accuracy because I didn't realize she was a historical character. So apologies for that lack there. But I did think it added several layers to her character. I found it very interesting. I think Maylene's reaction should have been more ambiguous in the book for it to satisfy me as a reader. I thought her just jumping into forgiveness immediately felt a little bit pushed too far for me, but I thought this was a very, very interesting piece to include entirely.
Yeah, I think that this was an extremely interesting plot point, but I don't think it was capitalized on as much as it could have been. Like, I think the idea of it was mostly just presented. Has she done enough to earn forgiveness, etc., but not really discussed or examined. And you're right, when Maylene decides to forgive her, that seems like an about face that is sudden, and I don't really know why she changes her mind and decides to forgive her. Again, I was happy that this was in here, and I thought it was handled okay, but it could have been stronger than it was. But, obviously I felt like that for a lot of the things in the book. So
fair. Those are most of my thoughts overall. I'm satisfied to move to historical accuracy. Does anyone have anything we haven't discussed that you would like to get to about the book?
Reading over some of the notes I made.
I was going to say, I have something stupid to say, so I'll see if Spencer has something good to say first.
I will say I really appreciate there being books about Dolly. I think she is a very interesting and strong woman. I think she is deserving of a better book, but I am very happy that the author chose to write about her, and I am now familiar with her as an individual.
Yeah, I felt like I did walk away with an appreciation for the work that she did. And I don't think like my frustrations of the prose aside, like it doesn't really detract from her heroism and the work that she did. So I did really appreciate that. This is sort of going back to our point about the lack of context around the history that the story goes through, but I wish they didn't skip over the Hong Kong and Guangzhou sections of Dolly's travel throughout the world.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that would have been very interesting. And I understand that like that might have been a very difficult thing to research, but it's at the same time like that kind of interaction would be so fascinating to see, and I feel like it's just something that was totally skipped over. And like what's her reaction to being in Hong Kong and Guangzhou? Like how does she feel about like seeing these places? How a lot of like the American travel to China at the time was like missionaries.
Mm-hmm.
And like did she interact with those? What was that like? Did she there's a lot to mind there that was just sort of skipped, and I feel like that was a real missed opportunity and a way to sort of like, I don't know, add a bit more nuance to the whole story. I don't know.
I think that's fair. Yeah, that's a miss for sure. All right, Grace, what's your dumb comment to make?
We, in this instance, have an example of a historical event that we have seen represented in two different pod books. So I just want to say that we did see the San Francisco earthquake, which means canonically Jack and Annie from Magic Treehouse were there.
That is true. And this could have been some of the archives that Dolly saved that they would have been looking for.
Exactly. So anyway, I don't know if they saw each other, but they were both there.
We so rarely have pod crossovers like this.
And especially not ones that involve time travel and magic.
So. Especially.
Happy to see it.
All right, are we ready for some historical accuracy and research?
Yes, please.
All right, I'm excited
Yeah.
to share what I have found. If anyone has anything else they would like to add, please go ahead and jump in. Like I said, I actually knew a bit about this subject matter from Lisa C's Shanghai Girls, which very different plot, but does experience the characters coming over with forged paperwork. I don't believe as paper daughters necessarily, but to be like getting married to people that they didn't really know that they were pretending to. So like similar situation. Actually, and not similar to this book, but like similar in the grand scheme of things. So in 1882, the US passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which banned Chinese immigrants to the US. And there was something similar passed in Canada at around the same time that I don't quite have the details of because we're focusing on the US, but know that there were similar impacts happening within the region. Immigrants could gain entry by proving they were a child of a US citizen. So, for example, if their parent had come over before, he had perhaps left his wife behind in China, she was pregnant. If you could prove that citizenship, you would be provided entry. And this led to a lot of people with forged paperwork known as paper daughters and paper sons. And a lot of this was the situation of someone would claim, hey, you know, my wife just had a baby in China. I am a US citizen, gets the fake paperwork, sends it over, usually has, gets paid in some way to facilitate that process. Many women who came through this way were forced into sex trafficking, and this was known as the yellow slave trade for a while, and were just, as seen in this book, like put in really horrific situations. And unfortunately, that was very, very common. Maylene is a good example because she thought she was coming over for an arranged marriage and was tricked into prostitution. Many paper children came over after the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire because that destroyed a lot of public birth documents, making it a lot easier to facilitate these forgeries if there wasn't anything speaking against you. This was very common in the book Shanghai Girls, which I mentioned so lovingly because I love Lisa C. So this is very common, and it's actually interesting to me that this book started a lot before that because such a flux happened after that event. Immigrants came through Angel Island, which was an immigration station for questioning, and oftentimes interrogation took several weeks, up to months at a time. I was reading one story of someone who was held and interrogated for 20 months. So it could be very, very long timelines with no guarantee of getting through. I saw something that said if Ellis Island seems like a gateway to opportunity, Angel Island was seen as more of a prison where people were detained and, threatened to lose their opportunities. And in the 1950s, the Chinese confession program began, which pressured paper sons and daughters to admit their false identities in exchange for potential legal status, which, of course, didn't always happen, especially as we got into, McCarthyism, fears of communism. A lot of times coming out and admitting to this was weaponized against these immigrants. Now, Dolly Cameron. She came to the Mission House in 1895, and she was known as the White Devil to the brothel owners and Lomo to the women of the house, which means little mother. The mission home housed over 800 women between 1874 and 1909, and it offered a safe place for Chinese women and girls to learn about Christianity, specifically Presbyterianism. A lot of the experiences Dolly encounters in the books were taken directly from true situations. For example, she did rescue a girl despite the bubonic plague fears and barricades throughout the city. And then she also saved a ton of personal and public records during the earthquake and fire from the mission home. She never did learn Chinese, which I thought was interesting. I'm like, I feel like could have worked to pick up a bit over the years, but she relied heavily on translators. And a lot of the translators, as seen in the book, were girls who had been saved by the mission home and continued to work there. By the time she retired in 1934, she was credited with saving and educating over 2,000 Chinese women and girls, which is truly a very impactful number. And then the mission house was renamed the Donaldina Cameron House, and it still remains providing resources for women and children, which is really great. And a lot of women throughout the book, as we talked about, were real, and their stories are real as well. One person we didn't necessarily mention was Tien. She was one of the girls in the home, originally very afraid of Dolly and not willing to work with her. But she wound up staying on as a translator and working alongside Dolly throughout both of their lives. And she is credited with making most of Dolly's work possible. But that's what I have in terms of historical accuracy. I would say overall, this book was very historically accurate.
And I love hearing all of this stuff because that was the best part of the book for me.
I appreciate when one of our books introduces me to something I don't know a ton about, especially if it's, an actual historical figure. And I have to say that a lot of times our books based on one historical figure tend not to be the strongest we've read. However, I do always appreciate when I get to learn about someone who made a real difference.
Calculator time?
Calculator time. All right, so it's time for our star calculator, where we rate on a scale of 1 through 5 on the categories historical accuracy, originality, characters, prose, and vibes. Spencer, Grace, and I will go first, and then when it's your turn, I will repeat all of these categories to you and put the scores in for you, so don't feel like you need to remember what I just said.
Cool. Perfect.
And these categories open to interpretation, so if you're not sure what it means, just, make it up as you go along. But starting with historical accuracy, I'm going to give it a 4 because I thought the history was fascinating and I thought it was really well used throughout the book, and I enjoyed the sections that were historical the most. But at the same time, I cannot give it a 5 knowing how much context we all agreed was missing in terms of history from the book. So I'm going to go with a 4. Originality, I'm going to go with 3 just because Shanghai Girls explored similar topics, and I did read that one not too long before this. So because of that, it just stands out to me as like not unoriginal, but just, I'd seen this explored recently. Characters, I gotta go 2 for characters. It was, as Grace said, it was a lot of, I can describe characters by what happened to them, less about who they are, I think, except for Dolly. So I can only really go 2 there. Prose, I'm going to give it a 1. I thought the prose was more suitable for a younger book. And frankly, it didn't suit the subject matter for me at all. Vibes, I'm going to go 2. It's not that long of a book. I thought the subject matter was interesting, but I don't know. There were sections that it was hard for me to stay engaged with it because of everything we just talked about. So all in all, that is a 2.4, which I am going to give this one a flop. And I don't have in front of me what I rated this on Storygraph, but I will pull it up and let you know.
All right, while you're doing that, I'll go next. I agree with you on historical accuracy. I'll give that a 4. I'm not going to repeat all your points because I agree with what you said. Originality, I'm going to go 4 for that too, because I do think this is the topic not a lot of people are writing about. And also I liked the split perspective idea of one real character and one fictional character. I don't think it was executed well, but I like the concept of it. And to me, that's more what this category means. However, characters, 2, because I don't think they were fleshed out well. I liked Donaldina, what we got of her, even though that was not really deep or nuanced introspection. And like I said, I don't think Mei-Lian really was her own character. Prose, 2, it was so elementary. Like we said, the audience might be better for younger kids. And actually, I don't know, stop me if someone already mentioned this. I don't think so. But there is like a young readers version of this book that I went to go look it up to mark it on Storygraph, because I guess the subject matter does not seem appropriate for young readers. So maybe there are things they want to tweak. But yeah, I would probably recommend that over this, even though I can't speak to the quality.
And I'm not familiar with it. I would imagine they would take out the prostitution and focus more on the characters like Tien, who kind of worked in like a household environment.
Or just maybe less explicit about what what prostitution is. Yeah. I don't know. But vibes also too. I did not enjoy my time reading this book, sadly. I kind of had to power through. That's a 2.8. I did rate this a 2 on Storygraph, so that is for me a flop.
All right, and turns out I rated this a 3 on Storygraph, which I think it was because at the same time as I was reading this one, I was just starting next week's pod book, which we'll get to at the end of this episode. And I think just I needed something a little quicker, and this served that purpose. All right, Spencer, you're up, starting with historical accuracy.
I think I'm going to deviate that much from you guys. I feel pretty similarly. I think accuracy also 4. Didn't really seem to venture that far out of Donaldina's life, and those parts were pretty accurate.
Next up, you got originality.
Originality. I think I would also say 4 on this one. I agree with a lot of what Grace said. You know, it's not as subject that's always talked about. And I don't know, I did like it's a different book than what I'm usually reading, so I did enjoy that.
All right, characters.
Yeah, I would also say too, I did feel like they weren't especially fleshed out. I think these are interesting people, but I feel like their story could have been more interestingly told. And very much the same point that you guys are making. They're much more characterized by the things that happen to them instead of having, I don't know, at least some internal agency over how they feel or how they would like to behave or act. Like that wasn't really explored that much. But I don't know. There were some interesting characters that we saw, but again, yeah, not too much with them. So yeah.
And prose.
Prose, I'd also say too. I feel like this is a good book for preteens, but anything beyond that, I think it may be a bit light.
All right, and finally, vibes, which is kind of the overall. How are you feeling about this one?
Yeah, I think I'd also say too. I did enjoy it, and again, I don't think as much as I've got some criticisms of the book, I don't think it detracts from telling Dina's story, and I do appreciate that the story is being told. And there's some interesting beats in the book. The plague, the fire. At the same time, I don't know. It got to a certain point in the book where I was just trying to get through it, and yeah, that's. I think it qualifies for a 2 on the vibe scale.
All right, and so that gives you the same score as Grace, a 2.8. And now for you, because we all kind of define these a little differently, would you consider this a flop book, a book that is fine, or a 5-star book? And I'm assuming it's not that one.
Yeah, I would say flop. It's in the flop category.
I will say it's always easier when we have a guest who picks a book that agrees with us that it's a flop. And it's when my mom was on here, she was like, "Oh, it's 5 stars," and we're both like, "No, it's not."
I'll be honest. We talked about this book a while ago, and I was really excited to read it. And then by the second chapter, I was like, "No, this is a flop. It's too late."
Half the fun is when it's the flops. Especially when, at the end of the day, it's a flop, but we learn something about a very interesting woman from history, which I think is always a win. I think there's no fault to reading ever, even if the book does not
Totally.
But Spencer, thank you so much for joining us. I'm very glad we read this, even if none of us really liked it. And I'm glad we were able to have this discussion with you.
Likewise, thank you so much for putting out this invite. This was so much fun. Did enjoy all the work around the book. So yeah, this is a lot of fun.
All right. And if you ever want to come back and recommend another book, we are continuing. There is no end in sight for the pod. So
okay. All right. I'll keep my eyes open.
Yeah,
that'll be fun.
Definitely. Yeah. And if you just want to hang out here for a minute while we do our little conclusion, then we will let you go.
Sure. That sounds great.
Grace, what are we reading next week?
We are reading my mom's pick for the pod. We are reading Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell.
Which I do have to say, usually we do not spoil the books we're reading ahead of time. But I realized when Hannah's episode last week came out, I had yelled at Flynn on the podcast for licking my copy of Gone with the Wind on the table. So if there were any keen listeners, you might have realized what we're reading, but probably not. But anyways, in the meantime, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at @5orflop_pod and join our Storygraph Reading Challenge, which we are quickly approaching the end of.
And if there's anything that you think we should be reading, please fill out the recommendation forms in the bio of any of our social medias, or just send us an email at fiverfloppodcast@gmail.com.
And until next time,
happy reading!